Okay, hello and welcome to CII's research webinar, Creating a PDRI for Mining Projects. We appreciate you taking the time to join us today. This webinar presents a research topic originally planned for our annual conference. I'm Mike Pappas, CII's Associate Director for Deployment. If you look in your GoToWebinar control panel, you'll see a gray bar labeled Questions. Feel free to enter your questions there and we'll address them after the presentation. With us today, we have Giel Bekker from CII Africa and Hardus Mulder from Anglo American. Gentlemen, thank you for joining us.
Okay, welcome everybody to this presentation where we want to take you through how we created a PDRI for mining projects. This presentation will be presented by myself, Hardus Mulder, as well as Dr. Giel Bekker.
African, especially South African companies, have been members of the CII since the mid-1990s. Although they participated as best they can, the distance between South Africa and the United States has always been a problem, especially limiting active participation in workshops, training, and face-to-face meetings. Talks about establishing a local chapter started in the early 2000s, and in August of 2014, a formal CII Africa Chapter was established in collaboration with the University of Pretoria. This chapter is completely self-funded and hosts various workshops, seminars and talks throughout the year. A unique aspect of CII Africa is that it plays a very permanent role on a national level. CII Africa and University of Pretoria facilitates collaboration, talks and discussions among professional institutes, consulting companies and contractors and owners to revive the African construction industry and also try to build on something which could be world-class. The PDRI for mining was the very first large research project that was launched by CII Africa, and it's our wish that this tool will be of value and benefit to the whole of the CII community.
There are almost 8 billion of us on this planet. Every single one of us needs water, everyone needs food, and everyone needs shelter. Mining is environmentally and socio-economically disruptive by nature. But think about this for a moment. No iron ore mining means no steel. No potash or phosphate mining means no fertilizer. Failing crops, a loss of food safety and security. No limestone mining means no cement. No sand mining or crust rock mining means no concrete. This means no buildings, no malls, no stadiums, no hospitals, no cities. No infrastructure. Thus, no bridges, no harbors, no rails, roads or airports. There will be no transport. Cars, trucks, trains, ships, aeroplanes, gone. No local business, no trade, no economy. No dams, water wells or pumps. No mining means no water, no food, no shelter, no infrastructure. Also, no cell phones, no computers. Wow, no Facebook. The complexity of mining and a mining project cannot be underestimated. It is an intricate, resource-intensive process. The front-end planning phase of a mining project alone takes much longer than in other industries, and during this phase, there are many considerations before you can even think about moving into construction. Once again, much longer than in other industries. A whole host of challenges will present itself, including often remote locations, with limited or no infrastructure, far from their output markets, social challenges, environmental constraints, might be in a country or area with geopolitical risk. You'll need to deduce results with incomplete information regarding the minerals underground, and the list goes on. With the added challenge that because of the extensive planning phase, anything can change at a moment's notice. A typical mining project will have a metallurgical plant that resembles an industrial complex above ground, but will have an underground compound which will typically include shafts, declines, stope planning, pit designs, blasting plans, dewatering plans, to name but a few. On site, you will have tailing dams, water processing facilities, road construction, pump stations, and electricity supply. And due to the often remote locations, a project will have to include planning for accommodation, infrastructure, transport of the ore, processing plants, smelters and railways, pipelines, ports, shipping and docking facilities, and much more. Complex stuff.
So one of the questions that we often get asked is, why did we see the need to create another PDRI? The problem is that when you look at mining projects, only 2.5% of all mining projects are considered successful. And on average, there's between a 20 and a 60% overrun in mining project cost since 1965. Of the projects currently in execution in the mining sector, it is anticipated that the cost will overrun between 25% and 30%. This will mean that between 2011 and 2025, $1.5 trillion will be spent, and of that, we could see 25 to 35% overrun in cost. So before we go and look at the PDRI for mining, it's perhaps good to just consider what is a PDRI. PDRI is a tool which evaluates the maturity of a project study, or also called the front-end planning phase. It does this by evaluating the maturity of several elements. These elements are weighted, which means that there are different weights assigned based on the relative importance of each element. As the elements become more mature, the overall PDRI score decreases from 1,000 heading towards 0. And then typically, for each of the previous PDRIs, a cutoff score is suggested, which means that at that phase, the project can proceed to the next phase, which is normally your detailed design and construction phase. So why did we see the need to create a specific PDRI for mining? Mining projects are very significantly from those in other industries. There are many unique factors, which includes the following or a combination thereof. There's ore extraction, the processing of the ore, the logistics to move the material around. There's many environmental impacts, social and social-economic impacts to consider, as well as the political arena where we play. So the approach that we took when we created the PDRI for mining projects was similar to that followed in the previous PDRIs, and it can basically be divided into 3 sections. In the first one, we identified the relevant elements. In this case, we conducted focus groups and one-on-one interactions to determine the applicable elements. We involved clients, which is mining houses, as well as EPCM engineering firms. After we finalized the initial unweighted list of elements, we then tried to apply the weighting to the various elements. How we did this, we asked participants to provide inputs on the weights of each element, and then that resulted in a weighted PDRI for mining projects. In the third phase, we then wanted to test this completed PDRI for mining projects, and the goal there was to determine the relevant cutoff scores. So what we did was we tested the PDRI against completed projects. We also wanted to determine the reliability of the tool, and we wanted to determine the proposed cutoff values for the front-end phase. And we were actually successful in doing that. If you look at the previous PDRIs and put mining projects next to it, you quickly realize that although the previous projects all had between 41 and 70 elements, The mining project PDRI has 180 elements, which sort of give you an indication of the complexity involved in mining projects. The previous PDRIs also had 3 sections, whereas the one for mining projects has got 4 sections. Before we proceed to look further into the various sections and categories of the PDRI, we will look at a short video that just briefly illustrates how the tool works and how it can be used.
Hi there, Colorado from sunny South Africa. Before we look at the sheet, let's first just quickly look at the layout of the sheet. On the left hand side, there are the various sections, categories and elements. By hovering the mouse over any of the elements, the definition of that element will appear, which will enable the person who's busy filling the sheet to understand what is meant with that element. So every single element has got a definition, and simply hovering the mouse over it will show the definition. On the top, there are the various definition levels. By hovering the mouse over level 1, for instance, it will show you that level 1 means the element is completely defined, whereas 5 means that the element is poor or incomplete definition. The manner in which this sheet is used is that for each element, you indicate the level of definition by simply inserting an X into the appropriate box. The tool has been designed such that if you either enter too many X's in one row, or if there are no X's in any row, it will highlight that row in yellow, which then indicates that there is something missing. So by simply inserting the X back and removing the duplication, the yellow will disappear. The tool is divided into 4 sections, of which section 1, the basis of project decision, has been divided into various categories and elements. And by going down, you will see that in this example, we have actually inserted various definition levels for all of the different elements. We've done this for section 1, section 2, section 3, and section 4. On this page, the PDRI score is calculated. As mentioned before, the PDRI, when there's no definition for any of the elements, will give you a score of 1000, and as more and more definition becomes available for the elements, this score will become smaller and smaller. So basically, while filling this sheet, you will already see what happens to the PDRI score as you enter the various element definitions. Once you've done the whole sheet, you will go back to the top, and then you can say, show me a summary of this. So here we have a look at the summary sheet. What this sheet does is to summarize the results of the PDRI tool. It will again show you the PDRI score. But what it then does is it takes each of the 4 sections, shows the individual scores for each of the categories, and they have a graph next to it. The way that the graph is interpreted is that if we look at section 4, for instance, it shows us that we have low definition for the procurement strategy, for the deliverables, for the project controls, and for the project execution plan, but we have good definition for the handover and the operational readiness criteria. Similarly, section 3 shows that there's good definition for site information, but not as good for project design parameters and value improving practices. In essence, this is how this tool works. You fill the form, you click on summary, and an overview of the outcome is presented in this sheet.
Here you can see a brief summary of the various sections and categories of the PDRI for mining projects. The sections become progressively more detailed as you proceed from section 1, which is the basis of project decision, to section 2, which talks about the project details, and then section 3, which talks about design for construction, and then ultimately section 4, which talks about the execution approach. After the PDRI for mining projects was created and weights assigned to the various elements, the weighted PDRI was tested against completed projects. There were 6 measures of project success that was used to test this validity. We used schedule performance, cost performance, change performance, then also the performance score, the customer score, and the operating score. And we correlated all of these with the PDRI score to determine if a lower PDRI score would actually indicate a better likelihood of success for the project. What we saw was that a 100-point decrease in the PDRI score would lead to a 46% increase in the performance score of a project. We also found that a 100-point decrease in the PDRI score would lead to an 11% increase in the customer score of the project and an 11% increase in the operating score of the project. We also saw that a 100-point decrease in PDRI would lead to a 5% decrease in project duration, a 5% decrease in project cost, and an 8% decrease in project cost due to change orders, which are all very good if you consider the magnitude of some of our mining projects. So after we proved that a lower PDRI score would correlate well with success, we also tried to determine cutoff scores. So traditionally, a PDRI suggests a score at which the project can be approved for detailed design and execution. As the front-end planning phase progresses, the PDRI scores comes down from 1,000 heading towards 0. Typically, the cutoff score of around 200 was used in previous PDRIs. For the mining PDRI, we used all 6 success factors to determine a cutoff score. We found that if we use 200 as the cutoff, those projects that had a score lower than 200 performed on average 6% better on their cost performance. We also found that on the schedule performance, projects with a PDRI score lower than 200 performed 21% better than those with a score above 200. And in the same vein, we also found that if you look at change performance, those projects that had a PDRI score lower than 200 performed 9% better than those with a PDRI score above 200. We also found that projects with a PDRI score below 200 on average had a 20% better customer score than those projects with a PDRI score above 200. In the same vein, we saw that the project performance increased by 11% for projects with a PDRI score lower than 200. We also saw that the operating score was 10.6% better for projects with a PDRI score below 200 points. We would like to quickly take you through a case study which we found during our study. This one looks at an iron ore mine in Africa. It was a greenfields project and it was an open cast mine, and the project included the construction of roads, rail, processing plant, workshops, accommodation, offices, water, electricity, and all the other associated services. The project was constructed in a remote area, which was about 850 kilometers from the nearest port, and it included the construction of a railway line. The project ultimately would produce 9.6 million tons per year of high-grade lump ore, and it would be exported mainly to China. This project achieved a PDRI score of 165 at the end of front-end planning. So bear in mind that we are suggesting 200 or lower as a cutoff for a good study. If we continue with this case study, which had a PDRI score of 165, and we look at the 6 success criteria, we can see that this project actually had a performance score of 5 out of 5, which is excellent, an operating score of 5 out of 5, customer score of 4 out of 5, and then a schedule performance of minus 0.06, which means that it actually finished 6% ahead of time. It was exactly on cost, and there was no changes due to change performance. So this mine has been in operation for 9 years after the project was completed. It was completed 3 months shorter than anticipated, and it was exactly on budget. and since day one it has slightly exceeded its design capacity. Here you just see some pictures. The left picture shows you a portion of the plant which was constructed, and on the right you can see some of the conveyors, and in the background a stacker reclaimer which is used to feed the stockyard. On the left hand side, part of the new railway line which was constructed is visible, and on the right hand side some of the offices and workshops on the premises can be seen. So the call to action from this team is that we want CII members to distribute the PDRI for mining projects to their mining divisions. We would also appreciate feedback to our research team, even on completed projects, to further validate the tool. And lastly, we would urge you to get involved in the UMM sector of the CII. I thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for that presentation. We now open up for questions. There we go. Questions and answers. Again, please put your questions in the question section of the control panel. And first question we have here, and Hardus, we'll go to you with this one first. How do you ensure objectivity is properly obtained in the definition level when you're choosing that 1 to 5 definition level?
Yeah, that is a very good question. The idea when completing this questionnaire or when filling the PDRI is not to have one person filling it. So it's actually a process, and because it's 180 elements, we actually foresee that it will take perhaps even a couple of days to do it. And it's also not to have one person do it. So it should be a team, and it should be based on an evaluation of each of those elements. So it's sort of a consensus based on rigor. So let's say you're evaluating civil engineering maturity, you would typically look through the designs, look through the drawings, agree on it, and then populate it. It can obviously be used by one person just as a self-check, but then you cannot be sure that it will be objective. I hope that answers the question.
Okay, thanks. In your experience, how long does it take to do a session, considering that this one has 180 elements?
Yeah, so we actually foresee if you do it the first time on a new project, we actually think it will take between 2 and 3 days the very first time that you do it, simply because you're going to have to get the teams on board and understand how to do it. I think the following ones should take much shorter. So if you're doing, let's say you do it early on in a project, it might take 2 days. And the next time you do it, you will obviously just look at certain elements, and then we think it will take 2 to 3 hours.
Okay, thanks. Hardus, got one for you. It's kind of a combination, but how many projects were used as a database for testing the PDRI results? And also, were they all from South Africa, or were they from various countries?
No, so the projects came from a variety of countries. We obviously tried to get as many and as varied inputs as possible. In the end, the projects that we used came from China, South America, specifically Brazil. There was a few. There was North America, the USA, and Canada. We had some from South Africa as well as other African countries. And then Australia was also well represented. For the verification portion, we ended up with 27 projects that we used. And you can think that you have to go through all 180 elements. So it took us a while. That's why I'm quite confident that your first time, it's going to take you probably up to 2 days to do it well. But for every element, you have to determine the rating between 1 to 5.
Okay, thanks. Giel, what happens if one or more of the elements is not applicable to a certain project?
So the scoring mechanism works the same, or is based on the same methodology that was used for other PDRI models. It was done because of consistency and bringing it in line with the portfolio of PDRIs that you have. And if an element is not applicable, the value of 0 is selected, which then will take it as not applicable, and it will recalculate the value to adjust for the non-applicability.
Okay, thanks. Giel, we'll go to you with this one too. Can the PDRI be applied to brownfield projects like tailing pond extensions, shaft sinking, etc.?
Yes, it can. It's suitable for brownfields, but it is more focused for larger capital projects where there's a fair amount of complexity and normally a longer duration. I think the person asking the question will probably ask, what about normal stay in business projects? It's not really suitable for the smaller projects, which has got a fairly well-defined scope of work. For that, we will probably recommend going for the industrial PDRI or even the PDRI for construction projects. But for bigger projects where there is actually mining and plant, it's suitable for both. And if there's only big mining or only big plant, obviously those elements can be ticked off as non-applicable, and it will still adjust the score.
Okay, great. We have a question here. Is the new mining PDRI in the knowledge base now? And the answer is yes, it is. It's available on the screen. You see a note there, search RT-366 in the knowledge base. If you search that, you'll find it. So it's available in the knowledge base for CII members, and it's available for purchase for non-CII members.
And I just put a link in the chat to the KB for that pub.
Okay, thanks, Jenny. Appreciate that. Let's see. Hardus, what are some of the highest weighted elements?
Okay. Yeah, it's interesting. When we analyzed all of the elements, some of them actually came out very highly weighted, as you could imagine. So typically, the ones that are carrying quite a big weight are, one of them is the project cost estimate itself. So how well was the cost estimate done and how much rigor went into it? That's actually the one of the highest weight. And the very next one, which is almost the same weight, is the project schedule. So again, how well was the project schedule developed, the execution schedule or the construction schedule? Then how much contingencies was allowed, both for CAPEX and OPEX, and not necessarily how much was allowed, but how well was it calculated. So the rigor and the process that was followed to determine the amount of contingency in the estimate. Then also highly rated, or some of the highest weighted elements, was the risk around the reserve. So do we know exactly what the amount of reserve that we are mining is? So how well have we developed the underground model? There was also the scope of work came out very high. So have we included all of the work to be done during construction, and is it well understood? And then some of the other highly weighted ones were the metallurgical yield. So do we understand what yield we're going to get from the ore that we're going to mine? There's also, and this actually came out in some of our case studies, did we secure the resource already, and do we have the land and mineral rights? Because often we found that some of our failed projects, actually there were some assumptions regarding that, and then it bit the project later on. So those were some of the highly weighted elements.
Okay, thank you. How does the PDRI complement, if at all, systemic risk assessment methods such as the Hackney model, which has been used extensively in mine processing? Hardus, maybe you want to take a first stab at that.
Yeah, so when we decided that we need to develop the PDRI, we actually looked at a lot of the current models, of which the Hackney model is one. We found some deficiencies in most of them. If you want to apply them directly to a mining project. So the reason we came up with this mining PDRI with all 180 elements is, first of all, to make sure that we include the most relevant elements. But it is not purely a risk management tool, although what you are trying to achieve here is you want to minimize the risk for the business when they make the decision to proceed. So I would say it complements. It's not exactly doing the same thing, but it's also looking at elements, and it's also, in a sense, a risk, because when you say that a certain element has got a low definition, you are obviously introducing some risk into the business, and by having a weight on that element, you can determine how much risk is still left in the project if you don't develop that specific element a little bit better. But again, I don't think they contradict. I would say they complement each other.
Okay, thanks. Giel, do you have anything to add to that?
No, I think it was well summarized.
Okay. We have a question here about what was the rationale for changing from 3 sections to four sections? Is it just that mining projects are different, or was there a conscious effort to have 4 sections instead of 3? Giel?
I think Hardus can help me out on this one. One of the big differences between the PDRI and the others are that it contains both a mining component and a plant component. So that is why it is maybe when it comes to the definition side, you have to spend much more time, I would say, not even upfront, but way upfront, to look at the mining aspects as well as social environmental sensitivities because of the disruptiveness of the project. So that is where this extended the life cycle from idea right down to sustainability and the decommissioning at the end. And that allows then for extension of the sections to incorporate the additional requirements in there. The PDRI for industrial projects was used, especially on the plant side, but it actually fell short when it came to the mining specific aspect.
Yeah, Giel, if I can add to that, I think you hit the nail on the head. We didn't set out to create or to vary from, to differ from the previous ones, but it sort of happened organically when we started, especially when we started engaging the mining companies. A lot of the inputs we got during the focus groups and the interviews showed us that some of the reasons why projects fail are typically sitting either in our section 1, which is the basis of project decision. So normally in a PDRI up to now, it focused more on the on-site construction. But in the mining projects, because it's being built often in remote locations, sensitive political areas, there was a need to also include right up front the project strategy and the country risk where you're going to build, and make sure that the feasibility of the project is there before you proceed. And then the middle bit is sort of the traditional stuff, which is the project details and the design for construction. And then towards the end, in our section 4, where we talk about execution approach, especially the later part of it starts talking about the handover and operational readiness. So it talks about commissioning and startup requirements and making sure that the operation is staffed and resourced and trained and the maintenance schedules are there. And those are typically, again, things which mining houses and to a lesser degree the EPCM companies tell us that it's very critical for mining projects to have these. And I'm sure other projects as well. So it was a conscious decision. It happened organically as we developed it.
Okay, thanks. Let's see, will a video of this presentation and the supporting PowerPoint be available? Yes, it will. It'll be available on our blog site. That's construction-institute.org/blog. And it might take a day or so for it to be up there, but it'll be available with the other, with our other webinars. And it'll also be in the knowledge base, I believe. How much of the mining PDRI is new compared with existing PDRI tools? Giel, maybe you can answer this one. And
Yeah,
so
actually
this,
quite.
yeah, go ahead.
Actually, quite a lot. I think when we first put down the number of elements. There was, I think, well over 200, if I remember correctly, and everybody said, okay, that's too much. And I think it was brought down to 180, and that is it. So it is substantially bigger than any other of the PDRIs for the reasons given. So so yeah, it is probably the biggest and probably most complex, especially in the upfront parts. A big portion, as I said, is for the plant side from the industrial PDRI, but the biggest portion, the new part, is associated directly with the mining specific components.
Yeah, it seems like this, mining projects are so large and complex. It seems like you would have parts of the industrial PDRI, parts of infrastructure, and other things all included in this one mining tool. What is the main barrier to implementing this effectively? Giel?
I think the barrier is to do it as early as possible and not when you're in trouble. The thing about mining environment is it's an operating environment. So it's production and operating orientated, not project orientated. So to get people away for 2-3 days to spend time on this just sometimes seems to be a bridge too far. So you need strong leadership and some visionary sponsors to really spend time and go through these items and see what value they really do add. Despite the fact that we can show quantitative improvement in project performance, you still have to get the buy-in from senior management to allow a large group of stakeholders to put time together and do this. And that remains our biggest challenge, I think, for any PDRI exercise, is to commit to that time. And the more data we get, the more we can get more projects that we can put on the database and validate the model even further, the stronger the argument will be or can be made out to use it as quickly as possible, as early as possible, so become a standard way of doing things. So I think there's a lot of people attending this webinar, and our appeal to all of them is to, if you use it or you have projects that are currently in the mining industry, please apply the model and give us some feedback. We really would like to refine it and look for the low-hanging fruit. Maybe we can bring down the 180 elements at the end and focus on the most important ones. So we rely on you to help us with that.
Okay, thanks. Hardus, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I think just looking at it from a different angle, I think it's a great tool for a project team doing the project study or the front end planning to use many times during the study to, first of all, make sure we're all working towards the same goal, but also as a self-assessment. So you could easily, by using it, determine which elements or even which areas still require work. And it might be that a whole subsection is not applicable to a specific project, but that's fine. At least it does show you where you still need to focus your attention.
Okay, Hardus, stick with you on this one first. What competencies are required to facilitate the PDRI workshop, and who do you recommend to facilitate the workshop?
I don't think you would necessarily have to be a mine engineer or an industrial engineer to do it, although it will help. I think if you facilitate this, we did create and you will see it on the knowledge base, there is part of our report is actually a facilitation guideline. So it does tell you what you should typically do when you do facilitate. But I would say that one would need a decent understanding of the mining industry, both the underground as well as the above ground work, but obviously not necessarily the knowledge expert, just a fair understanding, and also be a good communicator so that you can facilitate the workshop, but then you must definitely make sure you have the right people in the room to answer difficult questions.
Giel, do you have anything to add?
I think a level of, first of all, a good level of the team alignment. We found that in the beginning, people will come with their own ideas and sometimes their own prejudices to a session. So you have to get alignment and make sure there's a mutual agreement on what needs to be achieved. And it often helps to get some independency in the facilitation process. In the whole facilitating of it, so that that you keep to facilitation and not getting a contributor to defining the value of the elements.
Yeah, that's a good point. On all of the PDRIs, we recommend that the facilitator be somebody outside the project team. Can still be part of the company, but somebody that's outside the project team, just to try to reduce any intentional or unintentional bias that might creep in. This is for either one of you, but I think let's go to Hardus first. This is talking about other CII tools. Have you tried other CII tools to see if they're applicable to mining, such as the construction readiness assessment and planning for startup?
We did actually, and it is definitely applicable. So again, I don't see it competing with this PDRI. This PDRI actually tries to look across the spectrum. So right from the business case and whether it fits in with the company's risk tolerance and what they want to do in their strategy, and it goes all the way right to the end of commissioning and handover. Whereas those tools are more streamlined and aiming to do a specific, look at a specific portion of the works. So we did look at them, and they are definitely applicable, but they don't look as broadly as this one does.
Yeah, okay, thanks. Giel, do you have something to add on that?
Yes. Sorry if I can add something on that. I've used both of them. I think they are very good tools, especially on the construction PDRI. I found a lot of value on it. But again, it is focused on that phase. It's a very good alignment tool. In fact, during construction, a lot of, let's call it, you're over the honeymoon phase. And you get to a point where people are starting to stare at each other a little bit differently. And there's a lot of differences coming out. And I have found that the PDRI for construction is a very good tool to for intervening the process and just do a reality check of where we are really and get the opinions out and just get some kind of an independent view, objective view into where we are actually. But when it comes to the mining side, I think it's still a little bit short, and that is why the need for this tool.
Great, thank you. Hardus, we have a question from a cost estimator asking how can I start implementing the PDRI? How would you recommend that this cost estimator start approaching this with his company?
Ideally, you would want right at the beginning of a project, once it's registered and you're now going to start studying or doing the front end planning phase, you would want to agree that you will be using the PDRI for mining in the company. So that will be the chosen approach. And then the project team, which will include the estimator and the quantity surveyors, the guys that are going to look at the costing, there's a whole section in it looking at estimating and how did we get to the cost and the contingencies and the risk allowances. But overall, I would say, first of all, decide that you're going to use it, and then have regular sessions where you start looking on, especially at section 1 which deals with those upfront payments. And then just regularly see how you're tracking on them, and you will see it sort of progresses naturally as you get further into your designs. It goes to section 2 and section 3, which are your site criteria and then your design for construction. So obviously, I don't think you can use it in isolation just for the estimating. You have to do it across the board. You can here and there say something's not applicable, but the minute say more than half of the elements are not applicable, it's going to give you a very skewed vision of your project or view of your project. I would recommend, first of all, get alignment that this will be a tool that we will use. And even if you don't use it at the end to decide yes or no on the project of the project, you can still use it to give alignment between the project team.
Yeah, great point. Yeah, this is definitely a multidisciplined tool, and it's built to get input from a number of different team members. Good. Giel, let me go to you with this one. When you're in a PDRI review and you're trying to determine the definition level on 1 to 5, do you deploy a go and see method to actually view the deliverables associated with that element?
Okay, for definition, there's actually a description of what is required to actually claim a certain definition, whether it's 1, 2, 3, or 5. And in order to claim that, you must have evidence of it. So unless there is good evidence that a certain deliverable has been achieved, where, for example, there's a semi-definitive cost estimate, or there is an approved layout diagram, or there's a PFD that has been reviewed or HAZOP studies been done, unless those evidence are not available, you cannot claim that level of definition. So it is quite clear what needs to be done in order to get to a certain value. And this is what helps with the tool, as it takes out a little bit of ambiguity and subjectivity, and having a clear deliverable associated with a score.
Okay, thanks. Hardus, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I just want to add to say that you definitely need to have the proof. So especially because there's 180 elements, one could easily fall into that halfway through or towards the end to say, okay, so what's the consensus? Is it a 1 or a 5 or a 3? And one should not do that. I think for each of those, we should say, okay, where's the evidence? So let's say we are on a level 4 now for the estimate. Let's look at it, bring out the estimate. Let's see what is in there and what's not in there. And therefore, when you look at that specific element, you need the right people in the room to make sure that you've got it. You could shoot out of the hip, but that will defeat the purpose, obviously.
Okay. Giel, how receptive have you found clients to be to use the tool?
In general, good. We haven't, obviously this is a very new tool, so we haven't really applied it regularly in the market, but PDRIs in general has been used quite extensively. And you know, there hasn't been any criticism against that. I find it to be very handy. So we just started with the mining, so we still very much wait and see. We are sure, I'm pretty sure with what's going on in it and what we've already done so far, I cannot see any objections to it. So it's in process.
Okay, thanks. Okay, that's all the questions we have. Thank you very much for joining us today. We appreciate your time. We hope that you found the webinar useful. Hardus and Giel, thank you very much for your informative presentation. Don't forget to check out our events page to sign up for future webinars. Stay safe, and we'll see you next time.